All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nichol, and kind of a special episode. I don't know how much you'll be able to see, but I'm actually sitting in the bow rack. And this isn't Eugene, right? This is Springfield?
This is Springfield.
This is one of the Springfields where the Simpsons could, like, there's like, isn't there three or four?
This
You think this is the one?
Yeah, the guy grew up in Portland, and a lot of the names of the characters are based in Portland or streets in Portland. So
Okay, so this must be the one.
This is it. Yeah.
So we are in Springfield, Oregon. I remember one time I was on a road trip, and I was hanging out with these dudes at a hotel, and I said, Oregon?
Oh, yeah.
And they said, it's Oregon. There's
Not
a gun in my
anywhere.
state. Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. Yeah. But we're here with Kellen from Inside Out Precision, who anybody who listens to this podcast is going to know. And he was gracious enough to come on the podcast. I hit him up and said, I'm coming down to buy a bow. Why don't we do a podcast and do some content? And he was into it. So thanks for staying late tonight and making the time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. When does hunting become a thing for you? Do you come from a hunting family?
So, yes and no. On my extended side of the family, absolutely.
Okay.
So we have a rice farm down in Marysville, California. My mom's side of the family. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever, I'd be listening to my mom's brothers, my uncles, talking about duck hunting and deer hunting and this and that. My dad grew up in Colorado. Was never really into hunting. He had friends that hunted, but it wasn't something that he was like passionate about. But I remember listening to those stories of when my uncles were talking and just being like, I got to do this. So it started with bird hunting. I was 9 years old, which is the legal age in California that you can go hunting with an adult. So started off bird hunting. When I was 11, I went on my first deer hunt, and it was rifle hunting. So went 2 years, shot deer just back to back, like opening morning.
Are these blacktails, I'm assuming?
These are actually mule deer.
Oh, okay.
This is on the east side of the state.
Okay.
So after that, there was a kid in 8th grade. They had these things called brown bag speeches on the first day of class, and it's like a older kid show and tell. So you'd bring a brown grocery bag full of stuff that like represented you and what you like to do. And this kid brought in a broadhead, and he's like, "Yeah, my dad and I like to bow hunt."
That's a dangerous thing to bring to show and tell.
I know, that would never fly.
That was
these
not
days.
happening today.
Yeah,
no,
2022.
Like, take this
you're
razor
out.
blade to kids' school or to
You're
school
out.
kid. Yeah,
yeah, you're out nowadays. But he was telling, and I didn't even know at the time that like that was an option because I used to watch like TNN Outdoors and just stuff like that, and there was never any kids bow hunting. It was always just adults, and so that kind of put the seed in my brain like, oh, I didn't know you could actually like kids could do that. And I was just talking about this the other day with a guy, but what really made me want to start was I thought bows were cool, but B, when we went rifle hunting, my dad would take me out of school for a week, and then I'd shoot one opening morning, and then I'd have to go back to school 2 days later. And I was like,
if
I'm getting the week,
yeah.
I'm taking the week.
Yeah.
So I actually came here where I now work at the bow rack. I got set up with a Hoyt MT Sport, which I could barely pull. Like the lowest we could get, it was like 43 pounds.
So how old were you then, and how old are you now?
I was 13. I'm now 34.
Okay.
So
you've been coming in here for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
The owner, Wayne Endicott, they really are like a second family to me. I mean, he was such an awesome mentor, which I think is really hard to find these days.
Definitely.
If you just pick up a bow or a rifle or anything and just decide you want to hunt, if you don't know, sure, you can take your hunter safety course and all that. But if you don't have somebody to kind of show you the ropes, it's a hard thing to just learn on your own. So he was super instrumental both in my shooting development as well as
because that's what most people don't know. Like Wayne's a legitimate gangster when it comes to like his actual archery prowess. Like he was doing things with like a recurve and like competitions back in the day that was like crazy impressive.
Yeah. Oh, he's one. I mean, he's kind of like the unsung hero where he's not a big social media guy.
Yeah.
But you talk to anybody in the industry, whether it's guys at Hunting Fool or Eastman's or you name it. You say Wayne Endicott, they're like, oh yeah, I know Wayne. I mean, he was second in the Great Outdoor Games when ESPN used to do that. He's won every tournament you can win in Oregon. And, you know,
Back from a little technical difficulty, we were just talking about kind of Wayne's actual archery pedigree, and you were mentioning he was fairly instrumental in being one of your mentors when you first came in here to grab a bow. And since then, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, not just his background in shooting, but hunting in general. I mean, he's one of those guys where it's more often than not when he goes on a trip, he doesn't come back empty-handed.
Right.
You know, he's usually getting it done, which, you know, when you consider the success for bow hunting nationwide is somewhere between 9 and 11%. You know, guys that get it done 70 to 80% of the time, like that's some top tier stuff.
Well, and don't they say it's like 10% of the guys who are taking 80% of the animals, or like whatever that rule is, you know what I mean? And then the other 80% of us are left with 20% of the animals. Yeah.
But kind of going back to the history. So I came in here when I was 13, got my bow, and I just immediately got obsessed with it. It was one of those things where it was like, you know, from the time I was 13 to 17, you know, my mom would pick me up from school at 3:00 every day, drive me straight here, go run her errands, grocery shopping, whatever, and I would just shoot for 3 hours straight. And
just like right there.
Yeah, right on this range right here. Yep. You
That's
know,
awesome,
I entered all the leagues. We started going to 3D shoots. I got really into like the target archery thing for a long time.
Yep.
Which, you know, some people kind of crap on target archery, which I get. It's not bow hunting, but it's a really good way to motivate yourself to shoot for the 9 months a year where there's no season.
Yep. You know what else I think too, and this doesn't get talked about often enough, and Dan Staten, who we were actually just talking about a few minutes ago, high pressure stakes.
Yeah.
Like we're only in the red zone, to use his terminology, maybe once or twice a season if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And then you don't get that sensation again for a whole other year.
Yeah.
But I think a league is a great way to like put that pressure on yourself so you can start practicing shooting under stressful conditions.
Yeah. And, you know, especially when you get into a tournament setting.
Yeah.
You know, because just like anything, like you start shooting a league, maybe the first 2 leagues, you're a little bit nervous. But then you get used to the guys that are there and you get used to the targets that are there. And pretty soon that's not nerve-wracking. But then you go to Vegas and you got 700 guys on the line with you, and you know if you miss 110, like, pack it up.
Yeah.
I mean, you may as well at that point because, like, you're, you know, not going to place, at least in, like, the pro divisions. And so just like hunting, like, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable in a pressure situation.
Yes.
And there is no secret answer for that other than going to tournaments.
Yep.
And just putting yourself in that situation time and time again. And that applies to any facet in life, really.
100%.
And so, you know, I got really into target archery, traveled all around the nation, you know, in the youth and like young adult classes, which, you know, young adult, you shoot the same stakes as you do in the adult class.
Okay.
And so, you know, I met a lot of pros, and back then, you know, we didn't have YouTube videos and all these things to learn. And I remember when I was a kid, I probably pissed off a lot of pros because I'd go with my little digital like Sony camera and I'd take pictures of them when they were practicing, and then I'd print them out, stick them on my mirror in my bathroom, and then draw my bow in the bathroom. Maybe not every time with an arrow like I should have, but I'd draw my bow in the bathroom, and I would just try to make myself look like the dude in the picture. And
dude,
so
that's an amazing. I don't even think you
learned a
probably
lot from
realized
that.
what a good idea that was at the time. Like, yeah.
And, you know, you just hang around enough and just kind of be the fly on the wall listening. And you can learn a lot. And archery is one of those sports that's awesome where, like, everybody that I've met in the sport, like, they want the sport to progress.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a small world, too, man. Like, I'm sure you were seeing like the top of the top, like when you go to a tournament, like there's just those guys there's only so many, and the sport's not so big. It's not like the NBA or the NFL where you could go play a pickup game and you're not going to run into Kobe Bryant, obviously, but you know, insert another star here. Where I think archery is differently than that. Like
you're
like
shooting.
You can go stand on the line with the guys.
You're shooting the same course as they are.
Yeah.
And like I said, especially when you're younger, you know, when you're 14, 15, 16, like those guys know that the future of the sport depends on people getting into it and coming up. And so, you know, Reading in particular, you know, if you've never been to an awesome shoot, I'd recommend going to Reading. It's just, it's a great venue. It's, you know, there's vendors, there's great food. It's just really well set up course, and all the big names are always there. And they used to have, they might still do it, but it's like a shoot with the pros thing the day before the tournament.
Okay.
And I remember I got stuck on a target. Well, stuck. I was lucky enough to get placed on a target with Dave Cousins, who he's won everything there is to win. He was real big in like the late 90s, early 2000s. He's still crushing it. I mean, he was like third at Lancaster this year, did great. And Rio Wild, who same thing. I mean, at the time, like Rio was the guy to beat.
Right.
And if I asked a question, they would answer,
Yeah.
And if they saw something that wasn't quite right, they would.
I think too, at that age, you're not competition. Like, it would be different if you were right up there with them.
Right.
Then there's like kind of the head games and stuff going on, but you're just an up and comer kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I kept doing that for a long time. I did well at some national tournaments, got as much recognition as you could get as being a 15, 16-year-old doing archery. And ended up getting, a slot admissions to go to college for it. Back at James Madison University. And,
you can get picked up for art.
At the
These
time,
are like these guys that go to college for golf and stuff.
Right.
That it just blows my mind.
I know. I didn't even know it was a thing. So I had a counselor, college counselor doing all these admissions and whatnot. And she goes, "Do you have any extracurriculars?" And I told her about archery, and she's like, "Oh." It's like, "All right, I'll get back to you." And she's like, "Okay, there's this school." So Texas A&M was a big one.
That's a big school too.
Yeah, giant.
Yeah.
Texas A&M and JMU were kind of the two like most well-known ones. And JMU, like, I love Eugene now. Honestly, I could not wait to get out of here.
Of course,
like
man.
16
Of
years old.
course.
So JMU was like 3,000 miles away. It was like, oh, that's as far away as I could get. So I wrote the coach a letter. He goes, "Oh yeah, actually, one of our teammates, Braden, who I didn't even know went to JMU, Braden Gellenthien. I don't know if you follow target archery at all. He's still top tier. He just won NFA Indoor Nationals or USA Archery Indoor Nationals like 2 weeks ago, and he was there. And I had actually shot with him at Vegas probably like a year or two before. We were on the same target, and so he goes, "Oh yeah, actually Braden's heard of you. Blah blah blah. Why don't you come out and visit?" So I ended up going back to school there. And at the time, it was an NCAA sport, like sanctioned, full meal deal, which was really cool. And then halfway through my sophomore year, Title IX, which I don't know if you're familiar.
No.
With Title IX. So Title IX in collegiate sports is the equal allocation of scholarship money given to men's and women's sports.
Okay.
Obviously, there's no women's football team, and football has like 55 full ride scholarships. So there was a big gap between the amount of money given to men's scholarships and women's scholarships. So what they decided, when I say the NCAA, what they decided was best was to just cut like 5 sports in total. So it was like archery, wrestling, cross country, swimming, and gymnastics. They just wiped. Yeah. So, and they were telling this. They had a guy come in. He's giving us this whole spiel about how good of a thing it is. Which, I mean, I'm not opposed to.
Sure.
To the concept of it.
Yeah.
The execution was rather poor.
Yeah.
Because they're telling us that there's just not enough money in women's sports. We don't have the money because we give it all to the guys. As they're installing like a $6 million jumbotron in the football stadium, it's like, can we cut that thing in half and maybe give the other $3 million to women's sports? But long story short, I stayed there for another, to the end of my sophomore year, and then I came back home and finished out here. But like I said,
what did you study?
Short, I was a political science major.
Okay.
Yeah.
So super useful.
Done absolutely nothing with it.
I have a degree majoring in psychology and minoring in English literature. So equally useful.
Yeah.
It makes for a good conversationalist. That's about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But archery has taken me a lot of cool places. Is the point. I've got to experience a lot of cool things, meet a lot of cool people, and it's one of those itches I just can't scratch enough. And I think part of that is it's a competition with yourself. There's at the end of the day, it's not a basketball team. Like, I mean, you could go 20 for 20 on 3-pointers in basketball and still lose the game because your teammates didn't do anything.
Yeah.
In archery, it's you.
I love that about it. And there's something different Listen, there is a deep dive to go into rifle shooting, and I don't want to like piss anybody off when I say this, but it's like if you're shooting under 500 yards, just about like I could go home and take a rifle right now. I could drive to the range. I could set it up. First shot, I could hit a 4-inch gong at 500. I could put it back in the truck and I could go home.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like I haven't shot in the last few months like regularly because it's been winter and it's kind of my off season. I'm doing some other stuff. If I went to try and go, shoot a group at 60 right now, it would be ugly. Like it's this perishable skill. And I felt like with archery, it's just one of those things like I feel like I'm never going to master. Like it just feels so much more intricate to me. And I've also said to people, let's just say hunting becomes illegal tomorrow. I would probably never shoot another gun for the rest of my life.
Yeah. But you still shoot a bow.
I would still shoot a bow because I don't know, guns, they're violent and I'm into it. Like it's still cool. Don't get me wrong. But there's like a meditative component about
100%.
shooting a bow.
100%.
And it's like, it doesn't really, I haven't had any other disciplines quite like that in my life.
It commands your full attention.
Yeah. You got it. Exactly. That's what it is. Yeah. Like you can't do it.
You can't think about anything else.
No.
It commands your full attention. And I'm kind of quoting my, Wayne here when I say this, but he always says like it's literally in your DNA. It's as old as modern mankind. You think
isn't that crazy? Because it feels like home.
Yeah.
Like the first time I pulled back
a familiar
bow,
feeling.
I was like, okay, it feels a little awkward just because it's but I'm like, this feels natural. Like it feels normal to me to do this.
100%. And I mean, it makes sense because modern man, before gunpowder was invented, like we warred with bows, we hunted with bows. You see some of these bows, and there's not a lot left that were from, like the Pleistocene era or whatever. There's a few that they found, but like the craftsmanship was amazing because people realized that the better you can make them, the better you're going to shoot them. Yeah. And, it was really people's lifeline for a really long time. And so, and that's something that at the time I didn't realize it when I was younger, but looking back on it, it's like there was just this familiar feeling. And I do a lot of coaching, and I see it when, somebody who's never shot a bow, you take them out to the range, you explain the steps, you start working with them, blah, blah, blah. The average person is probably, 30 to 40 shots in. All of a sudden, everything aligns, like their anchor's good, they see through the peep, their grip is good, that pin settles. They get that first arrow, and it's like, ding, light bulb goes off. It's like it just has to take, it's that one or two good arrows in a row, and all of a sudden, like, you go from, looking like a complete noob to, like, the learning curve is so steep with it.
Right.
And as soon as they get it, I do all ages, but especially with kids, like, I have yet to coach a kid who, when the lesson is done, is like, I don't really want to do that again. Right. They're always like, can we come back? Yeah. I want a bow. It's just one of those things. It's just a fun thing. And it's also a great avenue for people who are competitive, but maybe not necessarily athletically inclined.
100%.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I coached this girl, Maya, Reddy, for a long time. She ended up being on the junior national team. And she was great at a lot of things she did. But she was not going to be on the basketball team. She was 5'0" on her best day. But she conceptualized things really, really well. She was a smart girl. She understood, that you had to take the technical side of things combined with just hard work and time behind the string. And she had that competitive nature. Like she wanted to win, and it was the perfect avenue for her because it was like, well, I can go out and, you're competing against yourself. Like you're always trying to be better than you were the day before with it. Yeah. And if you are, you get to beat all these other people. It's in its own category in terms of athletics, I guess. I mean, I wouldn't call it an athletic sport necessarily, but it definitely requires a lot of the same discipline that every other sport takes. You don't have to jump through the roof to do it, but you got to put in the work, and you got to put in the time, and you got to understand fundamentals and discipline. So it's
No, it definitely has its own space. There was something about it when I found it that I was like, oh yeah, this has been missing for me. Like I needed this, and I love how you can make it as complicated as you want. Like I know people who don't really know that much. As long as they got a bow shop they trust, they just pick up their bow and they shoot their bow. And then there's guys like me who like love. Like I got a bow press at home, and I love tinkering. And there's like that rabbit hole can be as deep or as shallow as you want it to be. And if you just want to go out and shoot and have some fun, you can do that. If you want to get super geeky about it, you can do that too.
100%. Yeah. It's definitely a tinkering man's sport if you choose to do so.
Yeah.
Sometimes tinkering gets you in more trouble than it does good if you don't know what you're doing. But that's kind of the whole fun of it. Is
Yes.
like you learn along the way, and what works for you may not work for your buddy, and what works for your buddy may not work for you. So I say this all the time, but like there's no exact science to archery. Like, I mean, even, the same brand, the same bow is going to react differently in other people's hands.
Right.
It's not like, oh yeah, with the Matthews V3 X33, you set the shims, 64th to the left and call it good, because your hand is different than mine. Your anchor is different than mine. The amount of back tension you put in the back wall is different than mine. We got 5 guys at this shop. We can all grab the same bow and shoot different holes through paper.
Right.
And I think that's what's really cool about it, is it's a very intimate relationship with your weapon. Whereas, rifles are great. Love rifles. I suck with them. He said, I can take a rifle out and, gong it at 500 yards. I missed a bear at 516 last year because I zeroed it at 300 with a 7 mag, and I had no idea how I'd aim.
Right.
I just put it right above his back and shot and hit like 18 inches under him. But generally speaking with a rifle, if it's a well set up rifle, you put that thing on a rest, put a guy who's hardly ever shot a gun behind it and say, just squeeze the trigger slow and boom, that's a hit. With a bow, not the case.
No.
It's a very personal weapon.
I agree. And it was funny too. So, the bow shops are not great where I live. There's a couple, there's like one kind of recurvy shop and there's one kind of targety shop, but
Sure.
like nobody focuses on hunting. So I would keep taking my bow in to get tuned, and I would keep getting it back, and I couldn't get, for the first 2 years I had to shoot mechanicals because I couldn't figure out how to get, and we're talking like a 4-inch gap at 30 between
Sure.
where my field points and my fixed blades. And I couldn't figure it out. And then finally I just got frustrated, and I'm like, I'm sick of relying on everybody else.
Yeah.
I bought my own bow press, and I will say my ability as a shooter noticeably increased when I started getting that like fundamental understanding of how everything was
work.
working. Like and it's so weird because it doesn't really make sense,
Yeah.
but you talked about that intimate connection with your bow. Once I'd had it on a press and I'd timed it myself and I'd put the twists in the cables myself and I understood I had a real breakthrough moment watching a Tim Gillingham video on yoke tuning, and I have a Hoyt Pro Defiant 34 that I could not get a bullet hole out of for probably the first 3 years I owned.
Trying to move the rest.
Yeah, and then I'm like, now I can't shoot the arrow because
Right.
I'm moving the rest so far over,
Yeah.
and nobody had ever even said the word yoke tuning.
Right.
And then I watched this Tim Gillingham video, and I finally have my own bow press.
Yep.
I put 2 twists in the one side, and I'm like,
Ding.
like I'm freaking out. Like I'm running around my house like I can't effing believe
Yeah.
I'm shooting a bullet hole. Like, because I literally thought like my riser was warped. Like I was like phoning Hoyt. I'm like, what's supposed to match up with what?
bow's all
Like,
messed up, man.
Yeah, it's just some voodoo.
Have you ever even made a bow?
Yeah.
Hoyt?
I was just
me.
like, I was going crazy.
Yeah.
But then once you do, now you feel like it's an extension of yourself.
Right.
And I understood it so deeply.
Yeah.
And it could just be weird voodoo, because maybe at that point you just have like a confidence that changes your skill, or maybe that little bit of a better tune maybe does. I don't know, but there was definitely a noticeable difference in how well I shot before and after learning how to do that to my. And I don't know if everybody needs to go through that, but I know for my type of learning, I definitely did.
Well, tuning a bow in general is extremely important. I'm, with our YouTube channel, I'm shocked at how many messages I get where they're like, well, they took it in the back room and they said they paper tuned it.
Yeah.
Like, it should be good. And I'm like, dude, that's not you shooting
my
the bow.
my shop told me there's no
Like,
need.
Right.
And
Some
that's
of
an
them
80-pound
say,
bow, and I got home and
have-
it was 72 pounds.
Yeah.
And I was just
They
like,
go, oh, you have camling. We got to fix that. It's like, no, that's how you tune the bow.
Yeah.
Like, that's, I don't care what it looks like at rest. I care about how it casts the string
yeah,
during the shot. It's going to do the same thing every time. You know, the machining on these bows is incredible.
right.
I mean, you know, we're talking like 0.005 of an inch tolerances or less on a lot of these things. So it's going to do the same thing time and time again. And, you know, a lot of people say, oh, well, my shop said, you know, Matthews, like they tune them at the shop. It's like, how would Matthews know what arrow you're shooting?
Yeah.
What draw length you're shooting? What draw weight you're shooting? All those things factor into how that bow is going to cast that arrow. And at the end of the day, you want the most forgiveness out of your equipment. And a lot of people, I think, confuse the term forgiveness with accuracy. They think like a forgiving bow is just accurate. Forgiveness comes down to, if you don't do everything you're supposed to do, your equipment will absorb some of that, and your miss will not be as bad. Especially with arrows. You know,
This is why I shoot 4-fletch instead of 3-fletch.
Sure.
Because I need a little bit more drag back there to kind of
stabilize
help
that thing
me out
quick.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, and arrows, I think are overrated a lot. I mean, people go, you know, we go through pages and pages of comments about, you know, spine and this and that and the other, and spine really is an important thing. Some people have the mindset like there's no such thing as too stiff of an arrow.
Right.
Well, if that was the case, there wouldn't be different spines.
Right.
They would just be a straight rod of metal that had no flex at all. An arrow needs to be able to flex and react off that rest to a certain point. If it's too stiff, it's going to put downward pressure on the rest, and then it's going to kick off.
Right.
If it's too weak, it's going to come off, and it's going to take so long to recover. Because if you ever watched an arrow come out of a bow, it's not just a straight line. It flexes.
Right.
And then about 8-9 feet off the bow, it straightens out. Well, if it takes 18, 19, 20 feet to correct, the point of that arrow is going all over the place. And with a broadhead, especially a fixed blade, that whole time, that blade is catching wind, wanting to plane in different directions. You just get these insane groups. So, like Wayne always jokes, like we get these calls, especially, it never fails. It's on a Saturday and we're absolutely slammed, and somebody wants to talk about the mystical flight of the arrow. And, you know, it's a hard conversation to have in 2 minutes.
Right.
You know, it takes a lot of time. But, you know, when we started the channel, that's kind of some of the stuff that I wanted to get out there was like, here's what you're looking for. Here's a sign that you're too weak. Here's a sign that you're a little too stiff.
Yeah.
You know, if you can determine one or the other, then here's what you do to fix it. Because I don't think there's a lot of that information out there. There's more and more these days.
I think what you knock out of the park on your channel, though, is the combination of technical archery info from a hunting perspective, and then delivering it in a way that's complicated enough that you're not dumbing stuff down where you're losing the essence of what you're trying to teach. But there's a couple other channels that they go so technical that it's kind of like, well, now you've lost me because you've gone too far. And I think you cut the middle of the road on both those issues like really well for like my type of guy.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, there's a lot of stuff that goes in to tuning. I mean, there are so many different ways that you can tune a bow or processes to tune a bow. And it's I do the best I can to answer questions online, but it's so hard to diagnose an issue without watching the person shoot. And even on video, like I do a lot of video lessons online and stuff. But you know, I can't see everything from one camera angle. Like I need to be able to be there and walk around you from different angles and watch how that bow reacts after the shot and, you know, shoot through paper and do all these things. And I think sometimes people get, you know, you can only buy accuracy to a certain point, right? Like, sure, your good equipment is always going to help. But really time behind the string is what's going to improve your shooting. And form, in my opinion, conquers all. You know, Levi Morgan's going to be able to take a $300 bow from Cabela's and outshoot 95% of the people in the nation that have a $2,000 Hoyt.
Right.
Because he is so consistent shot to shot. And, I get these messages where people are like, oh, my bear shaft is an inch left of my Fletch shaft at 40 yards. And I'm like, call it good, dude.
Yeah.
Are you a good enough shooter to know that you weren't just holding an inch left when the shot broke? And that's what I mean, where if I can't watch you shoot, I don't know if sometimes it's hard to tell if it's the bow or the person.
Yeah.
Even consistency is everything with archery, right? So even if you don't have the quote perfect form, which I don't even know what that would be, but even if you don't have the perfect form, as long as it's the same every single time,
right,
the bow's going to cast the arrow the same. I remember Terry Ragsdale, who was a really prominent target shooter back in the late 80s, early 90s. He won Vegas, and people asked, it was an NFAA magazine, and people were like, well, how do you tune your bow? What do you tune? And he's like, I just kind of set it up and shot it till it shot well. And he's like, I shot it through paper. It was like an inch and a half high left. But at 20 yards, it's the same distance every time. So that arrow's kicking the exact same way every single time. Now, if he was shooting from 20 to 70 yards, he'd probably have some issues.
Yeah.
But he was just so consistent with his form and the way he shot that, it worked for him.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't say just,
I think the essence of what you're,
but
because my gear reviews and kind of stuff tends to focus on going into the backcountry and like gear that you need to do that. And people do the same thing in that realm.
Sure.
They will stress over a pair of boots or a tent. And it's like, bro, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's a good pair of boots. Sure. Are they Hanvogs? Are they, well, now my brain is just completely shitting the bed. Are they La Sportivas? Are they, I could name a half a dozen brands.
Crispies.
100%. Are they more than $300? You're probably fine.
Yeah. In terms of the quality of the boot.
Because once you get up to a certain point, it doesn't, and the same thing with tents, should I get this or that? It's like,
is it lightweight? Is it waterproof?
Yeah. And I always try and tell people, it's not your boots or your tent that's going to send you home. It's your mind.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing in archery. I loved your example about the inch left thing. I think there's a shelf that we should worry about getting our gear to.
Yeah.
But then I think we're almost hiding in the technicality of it.
Right.
Because it's safe and comfortable and it gives us an out. If I'm just blaming everything on some weird glitch in my gear, then I don't have to take responsibility. And I think there's something about it's why I think everybody focuses on fitness. And I'm the last guy to talk about it. I am obsessed. But I think there's a safety in that when it's you'd probably be better off just getting more scouting in during the summer if you're actually looking at how to improve. Yeah. If you actually want to improve as a hunter, you spend more time hunting. 100%. And if you want to improve as an archer, you spend more time shooting a bow.
Yep. Yeah. So people see YouTube videos and they watch competition archery media and the ASAs and all that, and they see these pros posting pictures of these targets, where I feel like people think that they shoot as much as a pro does.
Right.
I know pros. They shoot a slow day for them is 150 arrows.
Right.
I mean, they are shooting so many arrows a week, and it's just like you were talking about fitness. It's like anything else. If you run 1 or 2 miles a week, it's going to be really hard to run a marathon.
Yeah.
If you run 12, 15 miles a week, it's going to be a lot easier. You run 20, 30 miles a week.
We're in the hometown of Cam Hanes right now.
Yeah. A marathon that's lunch.
That's lunch for that guy.
Yeah.
What a savage, man.
He's a beast. Yeah.
Insane.
And it's the same with archery. And it's actually shocking. So archery induces all these little stabilizer muscles and tendons and ligaments that don't really get worked just being in the gym.
Right.
Obviously being strong helps, but archery is not an explosive.
I found it actually hurt me a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Because I have some major muscle groups that are overdeveloped.
Sure.
Because I'd done more bodybuilding, bro split type stuff most of my life. And when I went into archery, I think I actually ended up getting some shoulder issues because I was unconsciously compensating with some of the larger muscle groups where some of my smaller stabilizers should have been doing some more of that work.
Exactly. And sounds silly. Yoga.
Yeah.
I mean, yoga is one of those things where it's like you have to hold a position and try to hold it steady as you can. And that's really what archery is. I mean, it's being able to hold a bow, because to a certain point, I don't care what sight you have, what stabilizer you have, whatever. If the pin's not in the middle when the shot breaks, you're not hitting the middle.
Yeah.
If you can only shoot as well as you can aim to a certain extent. Now, I'm not saying that, I always preach execution over a steady aim, because you see people that over aim. They spend, 15, 20 seconds trying to get that pin in the middle, and then they start breaking down and they just punch it. Yeah. I would much rather have a pin that's floating from edge to edge of the yellow. And as I'm, if I'm working it from right to left and the shot breaks, well, my follow through is going to help give that arrow direction to the left. So I'll always preach that. But, if you can get that pin to settle down from edge of X to the other edge of the X, instead of edge of the white to the other edge of the white, you're going to be more accurate. Yeah. And there is no substitute. I mean, resistance bands are good. Any sort of body weight exercises where you're holding yourself in a position that's tough is good, but really time behind the string is the best for that. And it's shocking. I mean, I've had a couple injuries the last year where I had to take, 3-4 weeks off of shooting. When I get back into it, it's like I got maybe 10 good arrows. And 100%. That pin is like...
Isn't that... I was exactly what I was thinking when you were... I was
crazy.
Like, anytime I come back from a break, and I'm probably even good for less. Yeah. I'll be good for the first 3 to 4. Do you know what I mean? Like steady, 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 and then it's gone.
Yep.
And so we recently moved a house where I have a garage, and I can only shoot like 7 or 8 yards. But the one nice thing is at least I can build my endurance, my archery endurance back up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I don't care how far I am. If I'm pulling 20 or 30 shots in a row, and I do that 5 to 6 nights a week, like one of the breakthroughs I had when it came to training protocols, and this may be just for me, I found it far more successful to have more shorter sessions.
Yes.
Like I'd rather practice twice a day for 10 to 15 minutes each than once a day for, even if it was 40 minutes.
Yep.
Like my body responds way better with these shorter like bursts, 15, 20 arrows in the morning, 15, 20 arrows at night is almost ideal for me.
Consistency is so much better than
the guy who goes out on Saturday for 3 hours and brings out the lawn chair and takes big long breaks. And I see that at my home archery range all the time.
Yep. We as a shop, like we always say when people are asking, especially newer shooters, they're like, hey, what should my practice regimen be? And it's like, if you can get 20 arrows a day, just 20 good arrows. Make each one like it's your only shot and take 20 good shots. You will be so much better than picking up your bow on, Wednesday and shooting 100, and then, next Thursday you shoot 200. Just that consistency, just going back to the working out thing. It's the same thing. Consistency is key with any sort of physical fitness or anything that you're trying to excel at. Like, because, so much of archery is muscle memory and this conscious loop. Joel Turner, I don't know if you know who Joel Turner is.
I know Joel well. I spent some time at his house. He's a good friend. Yeah.
Yeah. He preaches that whole thing.
Yeah.
You have to consciously practice something to commit it to the subconscious.
How about his kid, eh?
Oh my gosh, Bodie.
Dude.
What a freak.
Dude.
What a freak.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've seen him shoot a couple times.
That's what happens when you get raised by the Jedi Master, man. Oh my God.
And it is, you could set your watch by
you want to talk about consistency.
Shot timing. Exactly. Yeah. Consistency. It is from the time he draws to the time the release clicks to the time the shot breaks is probably within 3/4 of a second every time.
Right.
It is. And if it's not, he lets down and restarts.
Really?
Because he knows that and
that's his rhythm.
I think, obviously you're not going to do it in hunting, but with target archery in practice, there's those shots where you draw your bow back and it's just not good.
100%.
Something just doesn't feel right. Your pin's low. You can't get it up. Rather than just forcing that shot and ingraining bad habits, just let down.
I took that. That was such a big thing I got from Joel, because it's like every bad shot you take is an imprint, and you're giving yourself kind of permission, or you're undoing the work of the good imprints with every bad imprint.
Yeah.
That was another big thing I took away from him is I shortened all my ends. Like when I first start getting back into things, I'll only shoot 3 arrows at a time.
Yeah.
Because when I start, when I
arrows.
don't have my, and they have to be perfect.
Yeah.
And then because I was finding before I get my endurance up, by the time I get to 4, 5, and 6, I'm already starting to kind of fall apart. But that walk, because I normally shoot 40, that 40-yard walk there and back after the 3, shoulder kind of blood comes out of the shoulder, everything kind of relaxes, and I'm good for, and so the imprint I'm building is that like perfect arrow every time.
Yeah. And, I know like Joel's down here at the elk shape camp.
Yeah.
I know he travels with Dan, and, his kind of theory and mantra on developing your shot routine, like knowing how that shot is going to go before you ever make the shot, is really important. I don't mean to get so much stuck on target archery, but a lot of like the hunting industry and technology in the hunting industry is driven from target archery, because there's guys literally making a living being accurate and winning. And when you listen to interviews from guys that have won a lot of times, 95% of them say, yeah, I ran my mental program perfectly today.
Right.
All those guys at their home range are going to shoot good scores.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm not going to say one is better than the other, but going back to what we were talking about earlier in that red zone, there are guys that perform much higher in that zone.
Right.
And that translates directly into hunting, like knowing and being able to focus on the task at hand when that shot opportunity presents itself, because you get one in hunting. You don't have 3 other arrows to make up for a bad shot. That is so valuable. And, I think a lot of people get up to the line and they just load an arrow and draw back and just sling it. And they don't think about each step leading up to that. And sure, it's kind of boring, but, like with Maya, when she started, I remember, writing out like things that she needed to work on and taping it right underneath her feet. So when she would load an arrow, every single time she would see it. Right. Now, whether she read every step after the first 2 weeks, I don't know. But just seeing it every single time.
That cue alone.
It brings that subconscious
100%
cue into it.
Yeah.
A lot of people that want to shoot a hinge, when they first try it, it's like, oh, this is the cure.
Yeah.
Because they're not used to it.
Yeah.
And then after 2 weeks, they learn how to just rip the hinge off.
Yeah.
And so developing something where, like for me, like when I shoot my hinge, I've practiced it. Like Joel preaches, I've always had this thing in my head where it's like, I say squeeze 1, squeeze 2, squeeze 3. And I'm not trying to get the shot to fire on a certain number.
Right.
My goal is every time I get to the next number or the next squeeze in my brain, that release has moved. It helps me keep that release rolling, because so many people just get it and they just pull. Yeah. But their hand is so tense that it can't rotate. So then they just sit there, and now it's 10 seconds, and it's like, just get rid of it. Yeah. And they just rip it, which is the worst shot in archery. Like a forced shot with a hinge is the least accurate shot there is.
Yeah.
If you're going to force it, just use an index and just punch the hell out of it, because, at least you can still kind of hit what you're aiming at. But practicing that with that mantra, eventually what happens is when your pin hits the center, your subconscious kicks in, because it goes, oh, I know what's coming. Roll 1, roll 2, roll 3. So as soon as your pin hits the center, your hand just starts moving. And pretty soon it's like your pin hits and you just kind of wait and the shot goes off. But it takes hundreds, if not thousands of arrows, probably thousands.
Yeah.
To get to that point where it's committed to your subconscious and muscle memory.
See, and you know what I practice with a hinge, and this is all Joel. Like I went down there with an index, and he's like, he put me on the hinge almost 4 years ago. I practice with a hinge, I hunt with a hinge, I do everything with a hinge. And it's got to the point now, unlike those perfect shots, it's almost like once I decide, like once I see that pin, I'm an aim small, miss small guy. I've got like my couple little hairs or the little shading at the V of the shoulder, wherever I'm looking at. It's not even conscious anymore when I'm hunting. Like when it's perfect and you remember those perfect ones, it's like as soon as I see it and I decide, there's just this, and then it just breaks.
Man, it'd be really cool if the arrow went dunk.
And then there it is. Yeah. Because people are always like, well, what if you need to punch it because of wind? And I'm always like, Well, because your brain is so slow, you've already fucked up and you shouldn't have taken the shot if you think you should be punching it. And then I try to explain, it's like as soon as my brain decides this is the perfect time for this arrow to go, the arrow goes. Like I'm almost better in hunting situations because we were talking about presence earlier. I feel like I'm so present.
Right.
I'm not playing any of those anticipation mind games like I am when I'm at the range.
Yeah.
And I think is a really interesting thing you highlighted, especially when you're dealing with some type of tension-based release or even trying to use back tension with a thumb or an index. Time is almost your enemy because the longer that thing doesn't go off, the more your internal tension and anticipation kind of rises.
Yep.
And then the more pressure and the more torque. And you can feel the shot just start falling apart.
That little voice in your head goes, oh, shit.
Yeah.
Go, 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 go.
Yeah.
And then, wham!
Yeah. and then I'll notice I can't line up. I'm losing my framing.
Come out of your peep
my
a little
people
bit.
come out a bit and I can't line up. And then I'm focused on that. And then my anchor feels weird. And it's like, those are the ones I wish I could say I'd let down every time. I don't.
Right.
But those are the ones where I think we would be really
But as soon as you do it, you know it wasn't right.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, being able to diagnose your shot, again, comes back to time behind the string.
Right.
Like there are certain misses. When I miss, it's, I have two spots I miss. I miss low right and I miss straight high. Straight high, well, I shouldn't say those are the only spots I miss. I can miss other places. But usually, like if I'm high, it's usually because that shot's taking a minute to break and I come out of that back wall. I don't come out of the back wall. I take pressure off of the back wall unknowingly. Just even though my effort is the same, because my muscles are fatiguing, that pressure is lessening on the back wall. And you'd think it'd be the opposite. You'd think if you put less pressure, you'd shoot high, but it's or shoot low, but it's opposite. You usually shoot out the top. When I miss low right, it's because I'm usually pulling harder than I'm pushing. And for whatever reason, with my follow through, if I'm just cranking on that thing, on my follow through, my arm goes low right.
So what are your feelings on let off then? Do you prefer a little less let off so that you do have a little bit of fight there to like keep you active and in that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. It really depends on the draw weight that I'm shooting. Okay. Like on my V3X, I'm at 78 pounds. Okay. So 85%, I achieve pretty much the same holding weight that I have at like 75% with a 60-pound let off or 60-pound bow. But I do think let off is important to keep you honest. Right. That's why you don't see target bows with 85, 90% let off.
Right.
Because you want it to tell you if you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Because in target archery, you have the option to let down.
Yeah.
Now, for a hunting bow, if I need to stay at full draw for a minute waiting for something to step out, I don't want 65 or 70% let off.
No.
The accuracy increase from low to high let off is not so great that I'm willing to sacrifice the ability to hold my bow at full draw.
No, that makes a ton of sense.
But, if I'm 70 or under, like with my hunting bow, this is the first year I've shot 78 pounds. I usually shoot 70, 72.
Okay.
And I've preferred the 80% let off. Not so much because, I like the holding weight, but it's more the way it comes into the back wall. With 85, at least on the Matthews, like it's a smooth draw until it comes into the valley and then it just dumps.
Okay.
And it's just this like clunk into it. Or the 80, it's just this nice kind of smooth. It's like, okay, let off, and it just kind of rolls into the back wall. And I do like that extra holding weight. It seems counterintuitive, but like you don't have to work as hard if you have more resisting you. Like right. I don't have to physically put that extra weight into the back wall. So I'm not straining my muscles as much, which I know that doesn't sound like it makes sense. But for me, it feels like I can almost relax my arms more and feel my back muscles more engaged with lower let off. Whereas with higher let off, I feel like I have to like force that holding weight that I want.
Okay.
But it's such a personal feel, man. It's,
right.
And that's the thing with archery is like, just because I like that doesn't mean that I'm going to tell everybody else to go do that.
Right.
And I think the more you shoot, the more you will like lower let off. If you're a guy that picks up your bow a month before season and shoots 200 arrows before you go hunting, you're probably going to like higher let off.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a personal preference thing. You know, some guys say, oh, well, I want the extra speed. It's like, dude, you're talking 3 feet a second. Like that's nothing. And the speed game is something that all bows are fast these days. Like I remember when I first started, like Matthews had just come out with the Ultra 2. And it was the fastest bow on the market. It was 320 feet a second. Like, and that was 2002. That's not even that long ago.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it is 20 years ago. But, you know, nowadays it's like I got a Mission switch over there that's 315.
Right.
You know, and it's like the easiest shooting bow there is. So all bows are fast enough to kill these days. You know, sure, speed will gain you a little bit of forgiveness if you're misjudging yardage or something like that. But at the end of the day, accuracy is what kills.
Right.
You know, so, you know, I don't ever buy a bow or shoot a bow based on the speed rating. You know, it's like the shootability of it is what I really look for. And I'm not a brand loyal guy. I shoot my PSE tonight, my EVL 34. I love it. I have a V3X 33. I love it. I'm a spec guy. I've learned over the years what specs I like in a bow in terms of like axle to axle, what holds best for me, that string angle. I've got a long draw. I'm, 30 and a half, depending on the brand and model of the bow. So if I get a short bow, if I shoot a 30-inch bow, that string angle is so steep, I feel like I got to duck to get into the anchor.
Right.
Or I got to increase the draw length to where I don't duck, but then I have so much face contact with the string that I have, consistency issues with that face pressure. So
okay, so I think this makes a really good segue because, as I mentioned, one of the things I'm kind of the primary purpose of this trip is to buy a new bow.
Yeah.
So, and I consider myself a very intermediate archer. I've owned one bow my entire life, Hoyt Pro Defiant 34. And so let's talk about this journey to a new bow. What are some of the first questions somebody should be asking themselves, or some of the first things they should be thinking of when they've come to the decision, okay, I'm going to go drop some money on a new bow?
Yeah, so that's a good question because there are a lot of factors there. I would say if you're a brand new shooter, you need to go to a pro shop. If they just measure your wingspan and divide by 2.5, you are probably not going to get the right draw length set. They need to watch you shoot a couple bows. And some people, like, they'll be 5'7", but they have, freaking Bigfoot arms, and they have a 30-inch draw. There's other people like my boss. He's 6'1". He's my height. He shoots a 27.5-inch draw.
Really?
Short arms. Yeah. We argue he could probably do it a little longer, okay. But hey, that's where he's comfortable.
Sure.
So, and I mean, he's been doing it for 40 some years, so who might argue? So draw length, and then what your goal is. Like, yeah, I want a bow. Like, a lot of people come into it and they're like, I might hunt someday, but like I just want to get into it. I want to recreationally target shoot and spend time with my family and this and that. Like, I'm not going to put them into the PSE XF33 with like one of the most aggressive cams that's hard to draw, speed demon bow. We're going to start them with something a little bit more user friendly, like a Toyota Camry of bows, so to speak. And then it really comes down to, so draw length plays into a lot of different factors. So if you have, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, if you are 29 inches or longer, a bow that's 32 to 35 inches in axle to axle is going to be more comfortable. And this is based just on what I see. We set up probably 8 to 10 bows a day here. Generally speaking, people find that little bit longer bow more comfortable, and that has to do with the string angle. A really short bow, the further you pull that string, the more acute that string angle becomes. And when that happens, that means, instead of being able to keep your head upright and just kind of, come back, put your hand on your face and have that string come right into your nose, you have to put your hand on your face and then kind of move your head into the string. And being comfortable with a bow is way more important than just the quality or the make of the bow. So we were talking about boots earlier, and I use this analogy a lot, where it's like there's a lot of really good high quality boots on the market, but some are going to give you blisters and some aren't.
100%.
Like, we sell Crispies. Crispies give me blisters. That's no knock on the quality of the boot.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with the boot.
Yep.
It's just for me, they don't work.
I almost Lathrop and Sons threatened to sue me because of something I said about their boots. And that, like, I'm not. Well, I did kind of shit on their boots, but definitely there's an individual fit thing about boots. Hang on one sec.
Yeah. Battery change.
Oh no, 58%. We're golden.
Oh, good.
Okay, sorry, interrupted. Had to check on batteries.
Yeah. So I think bows are kind of the same way. It's like, we get some people that come in and they go, I want the best, most expensive bow on the market. It's like, all right, well, I can sell you a $2,000 Hoyt.
Yeah.
Or, try this $1,200 Matthews or this whatever. Price is not the issue. It's more what comes down to what you shoot best and what you're more comfortable with. And the best way to do that is you need to be able to shoot multiple bows.
Right.
Once I figure out your draw length, like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Obviously your draw length, but tomorrow
We're going to double check though, because I'm going to be honest. I've never had somebody of your caliber.
Sure.
It was one of these things. I think the first guy had me like put my hand flat on the wall and then like measured to my nose,
corner of the mouth,
something like that.
Yep.
And I think it's 29 and a half, but I'm also 6'1", so it wouldn't surprise me if I've been a little
bit longer.
I also find I think maybe I'm a little more comfortable shoulder. When I get fully stretched out, I feel, and maybe this could be a string angle, I've always felt like I had to lean in to hit my peep. Whereas if I was just a little bit shorter on draw length, like everything just kind of like sat in there a little bit tighter and I just felt like a little more comfortable.
Yeah.
But anyways, so it's one thing I'm looking forward to, like just double checking and set some things up and take some shots and be like, yeah, that is what it is. Or no, maybe you could be a little, a half inch longer.
Yeah. And, if you're going to a pro shop, most pro shops should have a demo of every bow they sell.
Right.
And if they don't, maybe find a new pro shop. I mean, I know some people are, their hands are kind of tied based on where they live and what's available.
Dude, I just drove 8 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, and I'm not kidding. Like even if I was kind of satisfied with the service of the bow shops in Vancouver, like there's nothing actually in stock.
Right.
Like they don't have demo bows to actually shoot. Like it's a very small, and there's a couple shops closer. Like I've had really good luck. There's this one shop, Riverside Archery in Washington, it's only like 3 hours away. So I didn't this was a very, it was kind of a bit of a dream mission to come down here and get a bow. But if I could share anything from that, it's like, this is something, if you buy a good bow, I had my last bow for 4 or 5 years. I'm not a guy that feels a need to upgrade.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm definitely worth taking like a 2-day mission to go to some place instead of like being frustrated that I didn't have.
Yeah. And you're spending a lot of money. I mean, bows are not cheap. I mean, your average setup, if somebody comes in here and they've never shot and they buy any of the flagship bows, I mean, you're pushing 2,000 pretty quick. If you need to release arrows, rest sight, loop peep, quiver, the whole nine, like you're making an investment, and it really is an investment in yourself. Because if you just order a bow having never shot it and you don't like it, there's no return policy.
Yeah.
Like, sure, you can sell it, and get something else, but the best thing you can do is shoot every bow that is possible for you to shoot, because you will find that one. I guarantee it's, usually the bow picks the person doesn't pick the bow. It's kind of like buying a dog.
Right.
You will draw that one bow back and it's like, oh, that felt good. Oh, that pin's just settled right there. Boom. Oh, that broke. You'll find that bow that just fits your shooting style well. And what we try to do here, and that I think Wayne has really set himself apart from a lot of other shops, is like, we do our best to make sure that when you leave, like that bow is set to you in the best way that it can be.
Right.
And I'm not going to name names, but there's a lot of big box stores where they go in, they look at them, they say, oh, you're a 28-inch draw, and then their peep height, they have an 8.5-inch peep height, so their hands just floating down here, and they just tell them, no, that's what you need. And it's like why? Like, and I understand they don't have the time and the resources, like train all these guys. They may just not even know how to train them if they did. But it is such, like we mentioned earlier, it's such a personal, intimate piece of equipment for the individual. And so, if somebody comes in and they're shooting and they're just, gripping the tar out of their front grip and they're, hanging onto the release and punching the trigger, like we work on the equipment, but we also work with them on their form to be like, look, if you want to get the most out of this, like here's what we got to change. And we don't just tell them like, hey, you're doing this wrong, fix it. We're gentle, we're soft. It's like, hey, there is a better way to do this. Let's just look at this. Like we have this old Hoyt poster out on the range with like Eric Griggs and Tony Taza and Nathan Brooks. And it's a great angle because you can see like anchor point, grip, all that. And we reference it all the time. I mean, there's so many holes in it now, it's getting hard to see. But, when you can show somebody as well as tell them, like I've always been a very visual learner. Like if I can see somebody do something, like I was saying earlier, taking pictures of guys and putting them on my mirror, that has always been so crucial for me to learn. And so a lot of times if somebody's brand new, I'll grab my bow and a release and go out there. And as I'm explaining the steps, I'm showing them the steps so they can see. Because if you just tell somebody, come back and slap that string against your face and put the pin in the middle and squeeze the trigger, they're looking at you like, what? Like, you want me to put this string on my face? It's going to rip my nose off. Wayne, I lucked out just coming in here having such a knowledgeable guy who's also a perfectionist.
Right.
And I think this is one of those sports where it takes that perfectionist attitude to really get results from, what you're selling. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of shops where, their main goal is just to push product. Yeah. It's like, get them in, get them out. We got the sale. Good luck.
So this is kind of like number one rule. It when possible, and if you got to go for a drive, go for a drive. But really finding a good shop is kind of paramount to getting a good fit between you and a bow. And you mentioned some of the things that would kind of pop out as red flags to kind of.
And if you don't have a good shop around you, let's say you get a bow at a shop, almost everywhere, like I can't think of a lot of places that there's not some sort of league or like tournaments around, right? And I get asked a lot, like, hey, like I'm looking for a coach, like do you know anybody? And you can look at USA Archery and stuff, but a lot of those guys just like read the handbook and get certified, and like they can't shoot a bow, right? I think the best avenue is like go to these leagues, go to these tournaments, just watch, look who the best shooters are, look at the scores, they're all posted. And just ask them, hey, like I'm new to this. Can you help me out a little bit? Like, can you look at my equipment? Can you look? Because if they're at that level, like they're past the pro shop standard, right? They know what they're looking for. They know what you should be looking for. And a lot of them, like I said earlier, with like a lot of pros, they're more than willing to help. Everybody in the sport wants to see the sport evolve. Yeah. Like everybody, just wants to yell like archery's awesome, come do it. So just ask them like, hey, can you look at my equipment? Like, would you mind, if I give you $50 for an hour, can you watch me shoot and make some recommendations on what I might need to do? Because you might draw back and they go, oh yeah, you need an inch of draw length, and you're shooting an arrow that's 3 spines too light. Right. Like go do these things. And I think that's honestly, if you don't have a good pro shop in your area, look outside of that. Try to find somebody who does know what they're talking about, and then they might tell you, oh yeah, actually go up to this place, they'll hook you up. Yeah.
No, that's a good tip. That's a good tip. Okay. What else do we need to think of? I guess budget is always going to play a role. So I think it would also be a good idea to have some kind of idea of what your budget is going into it, because I'm sure that's going to help you as a service provider. Like, if
it's one of the first questions we ask.
Yeah, man, I got an upper limit, like whatever. I got to be all in for under X. Then you're like, okay, great. Now these are the 1 or 2 sites that we're picking from, and these are the 1 or 2 rests that we're picking from. And so I think that would probably be another. Now, how do you feel? Because the first bow I got, the guy kind of convinced me to go a little bit lighter than I think I would have had he not said anything.
Like draw weight wise?
Yeah. And that seems to be kind of common to get a newer shooter. And it's kind of like, I agree in guns, like if you've got, a smaller person, you're not going to get them a 300 Win Mag.
Yeah. Here's a Barrett 50 cal.
Yeah. They're going to shoot it 3 times and hate life. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I would say like your average adult male, that comes in, we start them around 50, 55 pounds.
Okay.
And that's not to say that they can't pull more,
Yep.
but they need to be able to shoot multiple arrows.
Yeah.
I'm sure they could get 70, 80 pounds back twice, maybe. But that's going to be it.
I think I forget how hard it was because I'm used to just pulling 80. Like I don't, and I think too, once you get used to pulling, you learn how to pull.
Once you get the mechanics of it
when
down.
you actually just try and muscle, like I've had big dudes try and pull my bow back, and they're like, it's not that they're not strong enough, it's that they don't understand the mechanics of how to actually pull it back.
Yeah. So we always start low, honestly. And you know, it's shocking. Guys they'll come in and, you know, we'll set them at like, you know, 52, 53 pounds.
Yeah.
And then a week and a half later, they're back in. They're like, this is like easy. And we'll bump them up to 62.
Yeah.
And it's...
So do you guys start at a higher limb and just take some of it out and then look at potentially upgrading limbs or switching bows 1 to 2
generally,
years out?
like most bows, you know, like let's say just, a Hoyt, for example.
Yeah.
If it's a 70-pound limb, it'll say on the limb 60 to 70 pounds.
Okay.
You can get that bow down to like 52 safely.
Okay.
It's not the most efficient at that weight
Sure,
or
but
whatever, but
that's
it's
not the point
it's safe
either.
to shoot.
Right.
They can shoot it.
Okay.
And they can work their way up. You know, Matthews are really cool in the sense where now on that switch weight cam, the module determines the peak weight.
Okay.
So I can make any bow of like any of the V3Xs, all the way back down to the Verdicts. You know, I can make that bow a 75-pound peak weight. I can make it a 70, 65, or 60. And Matthews go up and down really quick with the limb bolts. Like if I take one turn out of the top and bottom limb, that's 5 full pounds.
Wow.
So I can take 4 turns out and drop that bow 20 pounds. So I can get a 60-pound bow down to 40 pounds, which...
And then it's only 60 because of the module.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to turn it into a 75-pound, you just got to
switch
upgrade the modules.
Yep. So
Wild.
technology is helping a lot with that.
Sure.
You know, when I started... most of the bows had like maybe 1 inch draw length adjustment. And if you took 10 turns out of it, it'd drop at like 8 pounds.
Okay.
And when I got really into it, you know, I was growing like a weed. I was adolescence. And so I was going through 2 bows a year. Unfortunately, you know, my family was able to support that and help with that. But like, you know, now, I mean, those stinking missions, I mean, you can take them from like 19 inches in draw length and 16 pounds up to 30 inches and 70 pounds.
Wild.
So, I mean, a kid can get a bow when he's 12 and shoot it till he's old enough to buy his own.
Yeah.
So technology has really helped a lot with that. And there's a lot of bows out there now that have that big range. Some shoot well. And I mean, in terms of like the way they feel, they're probably going to feel similar to a lot of people. But there's some where like you're not going to get it to shoot a straight arrow. Like, doesn't matter what you do to the cams or the rest or whatever. It's going to do what it's going to do. You know,
Right.
Mission is awesome. They're made by Matthews. So, you know, going back to the car analogy, it's kind of like a Toyota Lexus sort of deal.
Right.
It's like the Mission is your Toyota Camry. It's super reliable, user-friendly, just easy to drive, easy to shoot. And then the Matthews is like your Lexus sports car.
Right.
And I always say you want to buy the best equipment you can afford.
Yeah.
You know, in archery, like a new shooter, if I put them into a Matthews, they're not going to be at a detriment because they have a high-end bow.
Right.
You know, if anything, it might actually help a little bit. But I understand not a lot of people want to walk in to something they've never done and drop $2,200
Yep.
on a full setup.
It's kind of funny. I've always been the opposite. Like I'm a big commitment device guy. And when I get into something new, I've always responded very well to like investing in it heavily because then there's like this psychological commitment. It's like,
Sure.
holy shit, man, I really better learn how to do this. And the secondary factor is, and this goes true for camera gear and hunting gear as well, I find the more expensive stuff retains its value.
Yeah.
So when you do decide, oh, maybe I still like a $1,500 bow, but I want a Hoyt instead of a Matthews, you're going to be able to get out of that more expensive gear.
Yeah.
And in my experience, most gear is going to be like 70 to 80% value retention, even after a full season. If you've bought like, you know, Sitka camo or a high-end Sony camera or,
Sure.
you know, crispy boots or like really nice stuff tends to retain its value a lot more than like the middle of the road stuff. I noticed like a sharper drop off.
Yeah. And some of that comes into just, the overall price. Like, for example, the Mission, we sell it in a kit. The Mission switch, it's like $550. Sight, rest, stabilizer, loop, peep, quiver. Awesome option for a lot of people that want to get into it. But 2 years down the road, when you're looking to upgrade, let's say that's depreciated by 20%. It's like, well, is it really worth selling it for $200?
Yeah.
Or should I, just give this to like my stepson and just buy the next best thing? Whereas if you buy like a Matthews, we got guys that buy new bows every year because, they buy, well, for example, last year, like the V331, they bought that. This year they can trade it in for $800.
Yeah. So they're only out like $400.
Exactly.
And
it's like,
the sight's fine. The rest is
all
fine.
that swaps
all
right
your
over.
components are just going to swap right over.
Yep.
Unless they do something like a bridge lock
Yeah.
sight system or a
that
Picatinny rail.
That is throwing the sight companies on tilt right now. Like every sight company is scrambling like, shit, we need a windage block that'll go further right. Like the sight starts further left. Now it's in the middle. And it was so funny because like last year we had a lot of issues with spot hog sights. When the rest was centered and bow was tuned, like everybody was like 2 inches left. But that was, you flip the L bracket, micro adjust was all the way over. Like there was nothing you could do about it. So they came out with this bracket. Like Spot Hog's a local company. They're just 20 minutes up the road here. So we got a pretty good relationship with them. And, Bryce, their machinist, an engineer, was in here and he's like, all right, here's what we're thinking about doing. And this was in like November. And like 3 weeks later, Matthews comes out with his bridge lock. He's like, no, we got no use for these parts. He's like, everybody's going to bridge lock. It's like, yeah. So, but I think if you look at the trend this year, honestly, within the last 4 years, like there's not a huge jump in technology in terms of the guts of the bow.
Right.
But it's all these little fit and finish things that make things nice. Having the sight centered and the rest centered doesn't change the balance of the bow a lot, but doing that allows you to run the quiver really close to the bow, which makes a huge difference in the way that bow balances.
Right.
So, that's what you're seeing a lot right now is, it seems like we've kind of, and I'm not an engineer, so, take what I say with a grain of salt, but it seems like we've kind of reached a plateau in terms of how fast we can make a bow shoot and still have it be accurate and comfortable to shoot. Right. The technology is there to build a bow that goes 400 feet a second. Look at crossbows.
Yeah.
But you just miss fast.
Right. Back to the forgiveness argument as well.
Yeah.
Like the faster it goes, the less forgiveness we have.
Generally speaking, that's the case.
This raises an interesting question for a hunting bow because that was one of the things that did one of my decisions to upgrade this year was the two bows I'm interested in, the RX-7 Ultra and the V3X 33. Both of them were able to reduce their kind of horizontal profile. And I've always been a front stabilizer, back stabilizer. I'm a heavy bow kind of guy. Yeah. I've tried to go lighter.
Same.
Maybe I'm just not, I've always been a bit shaky of a person too. And I just feel, and I don't mind. I'd rather carry an extra pound if it means in the heat of the moment, I'm going to be a bit steadier.
Yep.
So I've always run a front bar and a back bar, normally like a 10-inch and an 8-inch and a couple of plates on each. And I always kick out the back bar at like a pretty decent angle. So two-part question. Obviously, there's a personal element to this, but just as a general rule, what do you like/recommend for hunting stabilizer setups? And do you think the major brands being able to condense that profile a little bit is going to significantly shift that moving forward?
So, yes, is the answer to the second one. And we'll get into that. So with hunting stabilizers, for a long, long time, I just ran a 10-inch bar on the front for my hunting bar, for my hunting bow. Then I ran a side bracket where that screwed into the stabilizer mount. And then the stabilizer would sit like 2 or 3 inches. So I'm left-handed. So the stabilizer sat like 3 inches to the right of my shelf, which helped offset the weight of the quiver. Recently, I've always shot a back bar for target stuff.
Yeah.
And recently, last year, I set up a bow pretty much specifically for the Total Archery Challenge.
Okay.
And it just shot. It held and shot so good where it was just like you were saying, like, I'm happy to sacrifice this extra, 14 ounces for a bow that aims and shoots this well. And when you have a quiver on there, having that back bar on, traditionally mounted sights and rests and quivers really helps, because, if you shoot your bow all year without a quiver, and then you throw it on, it's a noticeable difference. Like, that bow it feels top heavy. It wants to tilt to that side.
That's another thing I would recommend to people. I actually keep dummy arrows in mine, so I don't have to keep pulling them out, and I wear a hip quiver. And I have used older arrows, so I can actually keep putting it in and out of my bow case, and I'm not worried about beating the shit out of the vanes. But I would highly recommend, and I get so anal, I actually load up 4.
Yeah, because you have one.
Because I'm going to have one on the bow. And that's how I shoot all year. And I think that's smart. I think some people are missing the boat.
I recommend that all the time. Like, people come in, I'm like, generally if you're recreationally shooting, you're not going to be, pulling arrows out of your bow quiver, because then you're changing the weight every single shot. But, come June, July, throw that quiver on there, leave it full, still shoot out of your hip quiver, and get used to shooting that. So the back bar is nice because, like you said, you can kick that out to a point and play with weights and whatever, to where when you draw back, like, the bow just naturally wants to center. Now, for the second part of the question, with these new Streamline risers, it is noticeable. Like, we have our demo set up with the bridge lock sight. We run the Hamsky Epsilon rest. Just because we're fans of limb-driven over cable-driven, just so much more reliable. They support the arrow longer.
Also, for a demo bow, you also don't have to change it for different draw lengths, right? So that's a pretty big advantage.
Yeah, because a cable-driven, 28 versus 31, I mean, that rest is, you're either going to get contact, or it's going to be pulling on the cable so hard the timing is going to be off, blah, blah, blah. But when you put their, like, low pro quiver on a Matthews on there, and you load it with arrows, like, if I take my Traverse, which has a tight spot, which for a long time was, for a quiver, that was like as tight as you could get it to the bow, or at least for a single piece detachable quiver. It is very noticeable in terms of how that bow sits.
Right.
And like I said, it's not just, moving the sight a half inch left. You're probably not going to notice that. Moving, the rest, bringing that rest right behind the riser, you might not notice that without a quiver. But then when you put that quiver on and you can suck it in an extra inch and a half, or, an inch or whatever, it's insane the leverage that quiver actually has on the balance of your bow. And the closer you can get it to the riser, the better balance that bow is going to be. So I think it's not just a gimmick. It is something that is actually working. And I think you're going to see a lot of people go into that, a lot of companies move into that in the next couple of years. And it's just one of those things that some people are mad, like, oh, I just bought, I didn't buy the dovetail because I wanted it to be lighter, and now they have this bridge lock, and I gotta buy a new sight and blah blah blah. But I mean, it's not like you have to make the change this year. Like,
no, it still works the other way.
Yeah.
I've also noticed, because I've been looking to see which sites are available, and, like, let's say you're a black gold guy, they've got their dovetails for sale for $100.
Yeah.
So you're totally fine. You can keep all the rest of the site is fine. You just slap the new dovetail on there. You're only out $100, and you're off to the races.
Yeah. And I think every big site company right now is, like Black Gold, their dovetails didn't work at first, and so that their engineering department was like, all right, like, two of the biggest bow companies on the planet are having this inline thing. We need a pick rail and we need a dovetail that fits. And now it's out. Hoyt did the same thing with the.
And I heard they machine theirs exactly, because it's actually an Excel, like that Matthews site is an Excel landslide dovetail.
Excel makes if you buy the 5-pin bridge lock sight, Excel makes that.
Yeah. Because I did hear other dovetails, they would go in, but they were, like, a little bit sloppier.
Yeah, you got to tighten down the set
but Black Gold, like, apparently machine theirs, like, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see that a lot. I mean, everything's got to progress. Everything's got to evolve.
Yeah,
there's people go, all he did was change one little thing and charge $200 more, and it's like, well, you buy an iPhone every year.
Yeah.
All they did was add a better camera.
So I was just, who was I speaking to? So I actually work with some tech companies for my day job, and we're having one of these conversations about innovation. And they were like, you don't understand how long it actually takes to implement innovation and get it out to manufacturing. Like, we're not physically capable when you're dealing with like a yearly product release cycle of getting much more than like a couple single digit percentage points improvements across the board.
Wow.
Like we're going to pick 2 or 3 things, we'll give you a little bit more memory, a little bit more this and a little bit more that, but like that's literally all that's
market
possible.
the shit out of
it. 100%. Which is why most people, like, I'm a 2-year a phone guy. I've got a professional job, so I like having a nice new phone.
Yeah.
And it happens to work out the contracts renew every 2 years, but I wouldn't go buy. There's not enough difference in 1 year. But I find every 2 years, I'm like, oh, that camera is noticeably better than the one on my phone. And I find hunting gear the same way. Like I probably wouldn't be, just because where I live in Vancouver, I think down here you have a strong enough used market that I think if you were that guy, like I lease a truck, I like a new truck every 3 years.
Yeah.
And I don't have to worry about anything. I never have to worry about it breaking. I just pay the same lease payment and I drop it off, pick up the new one. Yeah. I could see doing something like that with a bow if I lived in an area, just suck up the $400 or $500 as part of doing business. And I think that point you mentioned earlier, that there's a point of diminishing returns. Right. It's just like with a lease. If you stick to like a 3-year cycle, you're going to do really well. You're never going to get dinged with over mileage. They're always going to, accommodate you. I think the same thing with bows. When you start getting 2, 3, 4 years, you start losing so much money that it doesn't make as much sense to keep on that quick refresh cycle.
Yeah, if I had a bow, personally, if I had a bow for, my Traverse, for example, that came out in 2019. It was actually a pretty sought after bow for a while, because when the VXR came out, a lot of people traded in their Traverse and they're like, shit, I want my 33-inch bow back. But when the V3X33 came out this year, it's like everything I love about my Traverse plus.
Right.
And I could have sold my Traverse and, made $650, $700 off of it, whatever. But I just kept it as a backup. It was like, it sounds bad, but like I've never actually had like a true backup bow.
Right.
I've always just relied like, well, this is what I got. If something goes wrong, I got an extra set of strings. But if I chip a limb or like, all sorts of crazy stuff can happen when you're hunting, as you're well aware. You take one little slip, your bow's on your backpack.
I created a set of strings 2 days before leaving for Arizona, I think, for a Coues deer hunt.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, I think I dry fired my bow. I think I was talking to somebody at the range, and I think I thought, because he looked at me, this guy, he's like, did you just dry? Because it went sound like a cannon.
We see it 10 times.
Yeah, and he looked at me, he's like, did you just dry fire that? And I'm like, no.
No, I wouldn't.
And then like in my mind, I'm like, shit. I
didn't
think,
load an arrow.
Yeah, I think I was like talking to him and thought I loaded it, and then just, because why else? Like
we had a guy. So we see that all the time.
Yeah. And it grenaded. Those strings were like shreds.
Gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a guy come in here one time, just a little story time here. We had a guy come in and he had waited like, it was a Matthews. It was last year's, the V331. And he wanted, this color limb and this riser and like custom strings and dampeners and all that, which, by the way, if you're ordering a bow like that, expect to get put to the back of the list in Matthew's production line. Yeah. They are concerned with getting the pro shops their programmed orders first, which are going to be standard colors. Yeah. So instead of 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to be like 12 to 16 weeks. Anyway, so he gets his bow and he's like so excited. We get him all tuned up and everything, and he's out there shooting, and we just hear we look out and it's in pieces.
Oh,
limbs and everything are fine. Okay. Strings are busted. So, we sell a bunch of good aftermarket strings here. So he's like, oh, I can't believe I did that. So we restring, and this is a Saturday, so we are like buried. Like the last thing I want to do is restring a bow for a guy that we just spent 2 hours setting up. So he comes back, put new strings on, goes back out there about 20 minutes later, did the same thing.
You're kidding.
Just too busy bullshitting, talking. So we put more new strings on. So now he's like $500 into strings. Yeah, because he bent one of his mods too. So that was a new set of mods. That was $50. Strings are like $168 all set up. Anyway, so like a week later, this guy comes in and he's got his bow, and then he just says, "Oh, I got my buddy's bow too that needs new strings." And I'm looking at the bow and I'm like, I recognize that bow. It's like I've put 2 sets of strings on that bow. And I'm like, is this I'm not gonna say names, I'm like, is this so and so? He goes, uh-huh. He's like, we were at the 3D range, and
He's too embarrassed to bring it in.
He just started exactly.
Yeah.
He couldn't show his face.
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
I'm like, dude, you need to just keep an arrow loaded on this guy's boat. Like, do it for him the next time. But he's just one of those guys where he gets so like hyped up and amped about talking about this and talking about that he just forgets to load an arrow. And we see it. We see it all. It's pretty easy to tell when a bow's been dry fired, and we see it all the time where guys. Like, we send a lot of bows to Hawaii because they don't have a pro shop on Maui. So it's like the only leeway we have with being able to ship bows because there's dealer protection rules.
Yeah.
Where,
that's why I'm down here. Man.
Yeah, exactly. And so we send a lot of bows there, and it never fails. They get the bow, they pull it out of the package, they don't hook up their release or anything. They just draw it back with fingers, and as soon as it breaks over, it slips out of their fingers, and they dry fire it. And we always get the call like, I don't know what happened. Yeah. The bow just blew up, and it's like, they don't just blow up, dude.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen one string. So I've been working here for 6.5 years now. I've seen one string that on the drawboard actually broke. And it was because somebody put their own speed knocks on and they crimped them way too tight. And it probably.
So even then, it's not like
right.
a normal string under normal conditions.
Exactly. Like bows don't just blow up. Even if you don't dry fire it, if they're overbowed, so this is why we start people at low poundage. Because if you give somebody a bow and they can't pull it, they're going to grip the tar out of that front grip. And when they pull, they're going to twist that grip. And as soon as that cam gets into the let-off stage, there's no pressure on that string anymore to keep it in the tracks, and it's just going to turn right off the top of the cam and just derail.
Yeah.
And
that blew my mind the first time I pulled my bow back on a bow press and realized how soft.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, now I get why people talk about, like, you could just grab that thing and, like, twist the hell out of it. But in your mind, it should be, like, but you don't understand the physics that it's like, no, right. Now all the pressure is on those.
Oh, look at the track buses. Of that cam. Your string's what? Maybe 1/8 of an inch in circumference or in diameter. And that track, like your string sits level more or less with the outside of that cam track. So there's not a lot holding it in there.
Yeah.
The best excuse we ever heard was just the other day. We had this guy come in, his bow's blown up, and he goes, yeah. My old lady's, we were having Mexican food, and she spilled a bunch of salsa on my bow. And I went to drop back, and it was so slippery, the string just derailed. Oh no, it's Chinese food. Yeah, she spilled a bunch of Chinese food on my bow, and I drew it back, and it was so slippery, it just derailed. Like, all right, so don't eat Chinese food around your bow, I guess.
That is too much.
Yeah, we hear them all, but.
Okay, I got a couple wrap up questions because we could go on all night.
I know,
and I want to respect your time.
No, you're good.
And these come from a couple followers who wanted me to ask.
Yeah.
What releases do you like for hunting?
So, up until this last year, I've always hunted with an index.
Okay.
I like personally. So, I like a trigger that has no movement to it before it shoots. There's a lot of releases that do that. The Spot Hog Wise guys, a really popular one. Personally, I shoot a True Ball short and sweet that has the swept back trigger on it. And the reason for that is because I want my hand to be relaxed as possible when I shoot. So if you just put your hand up and just relax all your fingers, they're going to hang at not quite a 90-degree angle. I want to be able to insert that trigger. Like if I just could put a trigger in my index finger, I want it pretty much in my second knuckle, somewhere between my first and second knuckle. So I like a release that I can shorten up a lot and get a good no movement trigger. So I would say my top three would be like the B3. Of course, now I can't remember the name of it. We sell a million of them. It's right.
They
here.
make nice stuff, man.
It's So for those that don't know, B3 used to be the Scott releases. So the Scott family sold to the Outdoor Group, who owns like Elite, Winner's Choice. It's like a conglomerate.
Oh, that makes sense.
They had a 3 or 5 year no compete clause, and when that ended, the Scott family started B3. So they're very reminiscent of Scott's. It's called the. I work at a bow shop. I should know this. It's a hook style. It's silver. Sorry, I'm digging through them right here. It's this one. It's the. Of course, they don't have it on there. Oh my gosh! I'll text you.
I'll put it in the show notes, guys.
Yeah,
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. I like that one. I love the True Ball short and sweet. And I like the Wise Guy if I'm looking for index. For a thumb button, I mean, there's a lot of good ones out there. I like adjustability in a thumb button, meaning, whether I want to run it as a 3-finger or a 4-finger, I can adjust the post length that the thumb barrel is on. So I really like the Stand Perfects. True Ball makes a lot of really good ones.
Yeah, I've got the Abyss.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
One of the tips I had, and if you are one of these guys who's switching over to like a hinge, I bought the Fulcrum and the Abyss.
Yeah.
Because they're identical form factors.
The Hawk. It's the B3 Hawk.
B3 Hawk. Perfect.
The Hawk.
And this was a tip that Joel gave me because he's like, this way you can practice with your hinge.
Yep.
And if you're still uncomfortable, you go hunt with your thumb button, and none of your anchor points are going to change.
Exactly.
Because it all fits the same way. So if you're a little bit on the fence, it's an expensive option.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You also don't need, those are like $200 releases. I don't know if I would, there's cheaper thumb buttons and hinges that
you can
line
get a
up
great
with
thumb
each other.
button, like the True Ball Fang.
Yep.
Is an awesome one. It's like $116 or something.
Yeah.
Like super affordable. One thing I will say, if you're trying to go back and forth between an index and a handheld, whether it's a hinge or a thumb button, you're probably, you might get lucky and your peep height will still be good, but generally speaking, you're going to have to adjust that peep height. So, I get a lot of questions saying like, oh, when I use my index, my draw length feels longer or shorter than when I use my hinge. And it's hard to go between the two styles.
Yes.
Even brand to brand, like the neck on a True Ball might be longer than the neck on a B3 or vice versa.
Right.
In like a handheld thumb button. But now there's a lot of people that hunt with hinges now. Personally, I have always just had kind of a hang up with, with a hinge, there's kind of that point of no return.
Yep.
Where it's like it's a millisecond from breaking and you're not stopping it. Where I hunt on the coast here, a lot of the time it is so thick, and a lot of time you're having to stop something in a window, and with a hinge, if I'm pulling through and it takes a step, well, now I have to restart my whole shot process versus just like taking my finger off the trigger. Yeah. So for my personal reasons, I like a trigger that I can control, and then kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, like I want to believe every animal is going to stand there and let me just settle the pin and pull through the shot. That might not always happen.
Yep.
And with an index, if I have to just get that pin on and rip a shot off at 25 yards in 2.5 seconds, it's going to be more forgiving than with a hinge.
I think, too, what I noticed is once I shot with a hinge for a while and got on top of, call it target panic, call it wherever you want, you can then go back to like the index and you can do a half a dozen shots and all your mechanics are going to stay sound.
Yep.
None of those like weird psychological triggers are going to settle back in. So you can go get away with it. Now, if you go home and still shoot with that for the next 6 weeks, I think you're going to find those same undesirable shot characteristics creep back in. Yeah. But I have noticed that, and I've heard that from a few people as well, that if you're practicing with a tension-based release on a regular basis, going out and hunting with a trigger-based release is you're not going to need to worry about those bad habits creeping in for 1 or 2 hunting-based shots.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, shooting a hinge, I think is it teaches you how to let that pin settle on target and learn what an actual quote surprise shot feels like.
Yeah.
I don't really like the term surprise shot. It might startle you a little bit at first, but you still are controlling the release. And Joel talks about that a lot.
Yes.
Where it's not just like, oh, there's my pin, like, oh shit, the bow went off. Like, you're controlling what happens to that release. And really, if you've really mastered a hinge, which that's a hard thing to do. Like, I think a lot of people think they're going to pick it up and 3 weeks later they're this Jedi master with a hinge. But I can fire my hinge really quickly and still have it be a clean shot, or I can sit there and let the pin settle, like in a target situation, and take my time and really just let the thing just roll slow till it breaks. Or I can get on it and go, okay, it needs to go now, tonk, and then the shot breaks.
Yeah.
And I think learning how to shoot that well, you can shoot your index trigger better. You'll shoot a thumb button better. I pretty much shoot a thumb button and a hinge almost the exact same way.
Yeah.
Well,
and even the way I shoot my thumb button is the same way I shoot my hinge. I try and kind of lock the thumb, and kind of roll back and like almost push that thumb button.
Yeah, the handle pushes into the thumb rather than the thumb pushing into the handle.
Right. And I find I just had a real mental block with back tension like I understand psychologically what's supposed to happen when you fire an index with back tension.
Yeah.
I just had a very, like my hand just claws up and I'll be pull, and then nothing's happening and I have to squeeze that.
Yeah.
So for me, whereas like I can roll that thumb button into my thumb, I find that particular action not very difficult for me.
I squeeze my finger with an index.
Yeah.
I load my back and I maintain that back tension for aiming purposes, but I build pressure with my finger. I basically start hugging that trigger with my finger while maintaining that back tension until the shot breaks. If I just try to pull, I just pull my front arm all around.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. I know there's people who can, but they say let it kind of slide in your wrist, and I just couldn't get it done.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
Okay, last question. Bow presses for like the at-home enthusiast. I mean, I'm kind of biased because you've heard my story, but A, what are your thoughts? And B, some actual recommendations. Like, is it worth it? His specific question was, is it worth getting a really expensive at-home press? And I'm kind of like, even the cheap presses aren't cheap, right? Yeah. Like,
so Easy Press, Last Chance Archery makes them. If you're working on your own stuff at home, I just recommend the hand crank. I think you can get them brand new for like, I don't know, like $3.99.
Yeah. The Easy Green, right? That's the one I've got.
Yep. There's one right behind us right there.
Yeah.
And if you're working on one bow pretty consistently, you don't need, like, we use the power presses in the shop here because we're doing a bow that's 28 inches in axle to axle and then one that's 36. And like, it's nice to not have to, your arm's going to go dead if you got to crank it that much every day. Yeah. So we use the power, but if you're working at home, it's not. This
is a great hack here.
For those listening,
they've got a drill mounted to the power. I'm like, that's a good idea.
It's slick to it. It moves it quick.
That is wild. Yeah, I love it.
Just got to keep extra batteries on hand. But yeah, I mean, Last Chance is great. You can adjust the arms for different limb angles. If you're working on a bow like the Defiant, where the limbs are so far past parallel, they do make these. I know you guys can't see it, but
that's what choked me up, man. And those are like, I think they're $250. Like, they're really expensive. And I'm like, of course I own the one bow on the market with beyond parallel limbs, so that I have to get these. Yeah, additional attachments.
Yeah, I know Dudley really likes like the X Press. I haven't personally messed around with it a whole lot, other than just at Vegas they have a booth, and I've played with it, and it does its job really well. But it's going to take you, again, if it's your own bow, it'll be set and you're good. If you're doing multiple bows, like if you're working on your buddies and this and that, it's going to take you an extra, I don't know, minute and a half maybe to get everything set up.
Yeah,
those are the two that I see the most of, and I think it's definitely worth it if you are a long way from a pro shop and you have some resources to kind of teach you how to work on your bow. It's fun to be able to tinker with things at home.
I know a couple guys in northern BC towns that'll like chip in on one and leave it in one guy's garage. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, 100%.
Because you can even do stuff like you could go in on a few things, and get a chronograph and maybe even an arrow saw and like just set up like one little hobby shop for you all. And I think if you're in a remote location, I think that's a great idea. Because if four guys went, $300-400 a piece, you could get like pretty well set up to work on your own stuff.
Not to do like a plug, but I think like 2-3 weeks ago we made a video. One of our customers,
the archery shop.
Yeah. And it's a 12x16 shed.
Yeah.
You don't need a building code or permit for it, at least in Eugene, if it's, under 200 square feet. And it's literally like I could take a bow out of a box and set it up at this guy's shop. And he did a really good job of, a lot of the tools and stuff like, Allen wrenches and pliers and this and that. Like, you can buy them from Easton and they'll be really expensive, or you can go to like Harbor Freight and get them for half. And you can find a lot of stuff online too, because and there's a list on Instagram of everything. He made a list of everything in his shop, and he put what it is like retail, but he got a lot of that stuff for like half or less from guys that thought they were going to work on their own stuff and then never touched it. So.
I just ordered an arrow saw because it was like one of the and a chronograph because it was one of the last two pieces. And I actually took a screenshot of that list from your Instagram because I was like ordering a last. And it's great. Like you don't even need, he's got like doubles and triples of a few things on there. Like you don't even need everything on there.
Right.
But if you want something to just jog your memory, like it's awesome.
It's good. Yeah. Terry's awesome. He's mine would not be as well organized as his. His is like every box has a box and
it was a beautiful shop.
Yeah.
I was like, I need to up my game
it's like, oh,
a little bit. Yeah.
But yeah, he did a really good job.
A little
with it.
paper tuning section.
Yeah,
and
he's
everything.
got it all.
Yeah.
He's
I have to flip. I have a stool that I flip upside down, and I duct tape the paper to like the bottom of the stool legs and shoot, but like through the stool. yeah. But I was like, hey, it works. It works.
That's good.
All right, man. Any closing thoughts? I'm gonna put your links, the bow racks links, all that kind of stuff in the show notes below. But anything you want to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I would say, if you're new to archery, which, with the Inside Out Precision channel, we've learned over the last couple of years that most of our subscriber base is either newer shooters or guys that have been shooting for a long time but never took it seriously, and now they're diving in. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There's nothing worse than being interested in something and asking somebody and having them, talk to you like you're an idiot. You don't know what you don't know. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out, whether it's to me or anybody else. And you're not gonna progress, and you're not gonna learn. Everybody had to learn at some point. There was a day where I knew nothing about archery. So I guess, don't be afraid to ask questions. Keep that fire burning. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's the one thing that, like, it's an itch you just keep scratching. You can't, I'm not sure there's such a thing as perfection in archery. I'm not sure there's such a thing as perfection, period. But especially in archery, there's always something to learn. There's always something to get better at. I certainly don't know everything. I'm always, open ears, open eyes when I go to these different shoots, and there's people that have been doing this a lot longer than me and know more than me. And hopefully I can learn from them like you might learn from me or other, channels and people out there. And that's how we evolve the sport.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right, guys, there you go. Do me a favor. Engage with the platform any way you can. Like, comment, share, subscribe. It's always greatly appreciated. And as always, thanks for tuning in.